are. Look at that.
Okay, scholars. So we're ready to start. If everybody is with us, we'll get started.
Actually, we'll start even if they're not with us.
Yeah, this is the last lesson on Ruth. Next week we start on the life of David, King David, and Stan and I will have 20 minutes of the sermon next Sunday morning to kick it off, and we're going to emphasize. John Mike is going to be speaking the next 5 weeks, and he's emphasizing the Psalms, and we're going to be emphasizing the David I never knew. And they will be doing that, and they've given us 20 minutes
To tell all the things about David we don't know.
Yeah, and we're not going to tell you about David and Bathsheba. We're not going to tell you about David and Goliath because you know that. But there's a tremendous number of chapters of things that people have no idea about David. So Stan and I are going to have 20 minutes to kind of get you started on
There
that.
you go, to get them started, because there's no way we're going to tell you everything about David you don't know in 20 minutes. It'll take five more Sunday mornings to do that.
And then we'll have 6 Bible classes in the auditorium here to continue that on.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll let you get us started.
Very exciting. So here we are. We've arrived at chapter 4. It's only taken us 5 weeks to get to 4 chapters. So we are in chapter 4 of Ruth, and this is where Boaz redeems Ruth. And before we go any further, one of the things that kept rattling around in my head this morning during the sermon is I kept hearing redeem. I kept hearing the kinsman redeemer, and would he redeem, and would he redeem her, and would he redeem the land? Well, we probably ought to remind people that redeem word doesn't mean like forgiving sins or causing Ruth or the land to be holy or right. It means to restore to what was once present, right?
Restore, to buy back, to...
Right. So you can redeem things like coupons when you go to the grocery store, right? And nobody thinks, oh, well, thank you for saving that piece of paper. That's great. No, you redeem it because you actually produce its value, right? And you actually then have its worth come out of what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The verb ga'al means to, one translation is redeem, but it's to buy back. It has a broad range of meanings. And the lexicons actually do not give the noun. It's a participle, and it's actually under the verb most of the time. Now, maybe BDB might give it separately, but it's. We're going to talk about it today. We're going to try our best not to repeat what Les said, and go a little deeper into some things. He went pretty deep in a lot of things today.
Yeah.
But there's some things that we'll try to clarify.
Yeah, and that's the first one. It's just redemption is restoration. And also, for those of us who are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, we are put right. And that's not to say it's got to be an either or, but in this phrase, Ruth has not done anything wrong. The land has not gone sour or raw, right? It's just that it's being restored to what it was. It's being put back in the family name. She's being lifted back to her place in the society that she would have been when her husband was alive. And that's something I think to keep in mind as we go through all of this. So that takes us back to verse 1, and like Dr. Cloud just said, we're not going to just repeat everything that was in the sermon. We're going to highlight some different things. And on this verse here on the screen, as you can see, the word goel there I highlighted in yellow, which is next to the word guardian. You might find different words in your English translations, but the Hebrew word behind those words for guardian or redeemer or kinsman redeemer or guardian redeemer, several different variations there, all comes from goel.
Yeah, closest family relative, nearest relative. It's a very broad word, but it made a lot of sense to them.
Yeah, lots of sense from the status viewpoint too. And then I put what's your name? Come here, what's your name, and sit down. So he came and sat down. And you heard a little bit about that, but we have a little bit more. And I was just speaking to Nathan White up here a second ago. He listens to this class every Monday during lunch, and so I'm sure tomorrow I'll get a phone call because I've put in some information for Nathan here in just a second. So Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and this is actually from Dan, where you were on one of your trips, one of your digs. And this shows a gate, and what it would look like is, this would be where the fortified cities, and you guys remember this from when we did the lessons in Joshua. This would be where the walls have an opening, but then it's kind of like a man trap. If you're familiar with security stuff, you can come in from the wall, but you can't go right into the city. There's another kind of catch area that you have to go through a security type process, and that's why the gates are so important, and why people would be able to congregate there in groups. It's not just like the gate of your driveway or your fence at your farm.
Right. Yeah, we will come back to this same city, Dan. This is the city of the famous Dan de Beersheba next week, because this was where the first discovery ever made of David's name took place. Mm-hmm. And in January of 93, the group and I, on my first trip to Israel, were here. And we walked right by in the courtyard, a place that they were going to dig up 8 months later. And guess who did the excavation? Hebrew Union College, my university, is still digging it, Dan. They were digging it, Dan, at that time. And suddenly there appeared a monument underneath the ground. And fortunately, what the lady did, she called the head people there to witness it, because there are many, many forgeries that take place. And somebody claims, this is found such as a. She wanted to see them. She wanted them to watch it dug out of the ground, so nobody could say this was something made up later. And there was the name David. But anyway, that's next week.
We look forward to that. There's what the gates look like there, superimposed on that picture. Main gate, outer gate, upper gate in the back, and then like a marketplace with a plaza. So it gives you a little bit of idea of that. And so what is a kinsman redeemer? He goes up, he's obviously a man of political power too, that he would go to the gates. That's the whole point, is that he went out there and sat down, and he's going to, here in a moment, call the elders. Well, in ancient Israel, Moses is one of the kinsman redeemer characters, right? And the goel word there means to redeem or to buy back, as you've already said, and then kinsman redeemer is what a lot of our translations say. But a true kinsman redeemer had to meet certain criteria in this role. They couldn't just attach the label to themselves and say, I'm a kinsman redeemer. They had to actually fit the role in order to be worthy of the label, right? And the Old Testament kinsman redeemer pointed to the ultimate redeemer in the person and work of Jesus, which we're going to thread that through this morning and end with that. So we'll hold that to be even more clear when we get to the end. All right, so we come to the Hebrew idiom that's in verse 1. This is the so-and-so. It's actually Poloni Almoni. Poloni Almoni, all right? Literally means such and such or a certain one, from BDB that you just referenced a second ago. The idiom is used when one wishes to be ambiguous. You can look at it in 1 Samuel and also 2 Kings. Here's the point, and Les got close to this morning. Certainly, Boaz knew this person's name. It's not like he went, there's someone much closer I've got to go talk to. I can't remember what their name is, but no, if he knew there was someone closer that he needed to check with, he obviously knew who it was, and he obviously knew their name. But the writer is not using the name on purpose, which we'll look at here in a minute. So the relative's name has got to be known by Boaz, especially as Les pointed out. He did a good job of talking about small towns where everybody knows everybody. So that would also be true. But also a family member, a cousin, you would also know, and he would have been able to actually utter his actual name. Now the reference is to maybe a song. All right, some of you are like, "What in the world?" But Nathan will laugh tomorrow about this. Poloni Almoni could have just been shortened to Moni Moni. Maybe Billy Idol's singing about who's it? He doesn't know her name. I don't know. I've never understood that song. But when I started saying Poloni Almoni, I told Dr. Cloud, I said, well, maybe that's what he was trying to do. So some of you get that reference. However, the narrator refuses to record his name in a form of poetic justice. I mean, think about this. This entire book has been about generations and people who were related to people, and then this person begot this person and this person and this person, all the way down to David is how it ends, right? And then there's this so-and-so that we decide to blot out their name on purpose.
Yeah, let's say a word about that. This is one of the strangest expressions in the Hebrew Bible. And as Stan has already said, he knew the guy. There's no doubt he knew the guy's name and why it's not there. But the translations, I looked at 30 different translations. And the one that Les picked out turned out to be the most common. Friend.
Friend.
Hey, friend, come over here. The Holman Bible said he called him by name. The other one said he avoided his name. We don't know why.
Right.
It's done like that. But after studying it in detail, I really believe two versions say fellow.
Hey, you.
Yeah. I think the best translation is like Sherlock Holmes used to approach Watson when they might disagree or something, and he called him my dear fellow. But he did it with a certain fondness, but he still corrected him. And so
I've heard you do that to me a few times, so I've got to think through that one. What I do like about what you just said, though, is this not. Let's be careful that none of us are dogmatic about things that we decide make or justify why certain things in this chapter of Ruth do or don't do something. Like, for example, we know that he would have known his name, as you just correctly said, but we don't know why he didn't use his name. But what we do know is that Mahlon, his name is trying to be not lost from the family line. And it's about names at this point and why names are important. And this guy's name's not remembered on purpose because he didn't care.
yeah, the commentaries go crazy on this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
5 or 6 different interpretations. One is the writer didn't think that he needed to be mentioned by name because he did an embarrassing thing. Another one thinks that Boaz is kind of criticizing him. I don't think he's criticizing him. I think when Boaz hears him say, I will redeem, Boaz probably said, oh no. I mean, it's obvious Boaz wants to be the redeemer.
Right.
And so I think rather than putting him down.
And that's very important, I think, for us too. Not only does Boaz want to be the redeemer, let's back all the way up and say, why didn't Naomi say to Ruth, well, now we've got this guy in the family that's the kinsman redeemer who's closer to you than anybody else, and you ought to go find his field and you ought to go see when he's at the threshing floor. No, she said Boaz, because she knew the character of Boaz and knew of the two family members. I'm sure Naomi knew about the Mr. Poloni Almoni as well, but she also knew Mr. Poloni Almoni's character and that he wouldn't redeem her. So she just, forget that. Let's just go straight to the person who we want to redeem you, who will be Boaz. And so I think they're both on the same page, but I love your little shock there of, well, what if Poloni Almoni does redeem her? And then the whole plan goes down the tubes, because that would just be like, okay, well, you have first right of refusal and you said you'd do it, so I'll just go home. That would have been a shorter story.
Well, Stan and I spent a lot of time talking on the phone about different things. I want to mention something about Naomi, but Joe has a question.
Oh, yeah, Joe. No, Naomi knew about him beforehand, and then Ruth is the one who wanted to go glean in the field. So yes and no. Like Naomi already knew about Boaz. She says Boaz is the. Okay, I could be wrong on the timing. But
Well,
she knows Boaz's character is what I'm saying. Like he is the one of everybody who's eligible that Naomi says Ruth should pursue.
and he's already stepped forward
Yeah.
and helped them out,
Right.
and has been concerned about them, sent food home with them. So obviously, he's the guy that really is a caring guy.
Right.
But
And
now,
she knew that from the beginning.
one thing we did discuss,
What's that?
and this will hit you kind of suddenly. So I'm not going to ask you the question. I'm going to give you my opinion. Why didn't Boaz marry Naomi rather than Ruth? You read Deuteronomy, and well, here's my belief on that. A lot of laws in the Old Testament are stated, and then the rabbis, I mean, the scholars that had to interpret them. They didn't always cover every little minute point. Just like in the Supreme Court or different cases we have today, there are things that come up that never have come up before that are related. Apparently, the interpretation was maybe Naomi was too old to have children.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
So
With one more addition, I wonder if the fact that family had already gone down the family tree to husband and wife, daughter-in-law, if it had been Naomi with two children, unmarried, then I think he would have redeemed Naomi. But you've already got a widow and a widow, and the younger widow is of childbearing age,
Right.
and the older widow's not.
Is
And
not.
in that time, a lot of men do pass away before the women, so you can't marry all the old widows because there's not any old men to marry them. So I think that those two things probably are.
yeah, and the biblical scholars at that time, like in the time of Jesus, they're continually trying to interpret the law and explain, because it doesn't cover every little minute point. It lays
Right.
out a principle
Right.
to follow. Like, a guy dies, and this woman that's left, he's got 7 brothers. Which brother does she marry?
Right.
Oldest one? You see? And so there's probably interpretations coming here, but there's a general law that's given. That take care of her. That's what the basic law is.
Agreed. And Naomi gets taken care of because she comes under the roof of the house of Boaz as well as the mother-in-law of
And it's
Ruth.
obvious she wants Boaz, and she wants Boaz to marry Ruth.
Right. Agreed. So continuing on, because the actual name of this relative is not recorded, the translation of this expression is difficult, as we've just kind of said. Contemporary English style expects either a name or a title, but the purpose of the expression is to remove his name. This is usually supplied in modern translations, like you said, of friend so-and-so, perhaps Mr. so-and-so, or Mr. No-Name makes the point. Verse 3 states that Naomi is selling land that belonged to Elimelech. Now they go bananas over this too. They say that, wait a minute, would she have had the right? Would she actually have owned the land in this time of human history where did women actually own land? Did he will it to her and that's why she was able to do this? Or is she selling the rights to use land that's family land because she can't farm it by herself? There's all kinds of crazy ideas about what this sentence actually means. But I don't think we have to worry about that because this is really just the catalyst for how Boaz is going to talk to this other relative about the opportunity that's available. So the land will go with Naomi and Ruth, and he doesn't yet know that, but it's more about that than it is about the land itself. Like I didn't see anybody who said it this way dogmatically, but I would disagree if they did. I don't think that there was ever a possibility that this is just public square marketplace and she's just selling off some land and somebody could say, well, I'll buy that parcel of land and you have a nice life and I'll have a nice life and now it's mine, like we do. That it always was going to be attached to people. We just didn't get that in the story before we got the fact that she was going to sell the land. Does that make sense? And so here we go. Some of these pictures are older than others, but this is probably Boaz with the green and maroon on, hollering out to Mr. So-and-so, saying, "Hey, buddy, we've got a matter to discuss." And then he calls the elders together there as witnesses to do this matter. And I found this. Last week we had a different one of these. We had a different tablet that was kind of a darker color, more mahogany looking, that was harder to see. This is another tablet recording a land transfer from Newsy again. So we know these things occurred. Now, it doesn't say anything about the shoe that we're going to talk about here in a minute. That's not on the tablet. The shoe must have been an Israelite thing, and the tablet, the agreement, the transfer agreement, was kind of an ancient Near East thing.
Yeah, and we may find something, because as you and I discussed this past week, they're using artificial intelligence now to translate some of those 500,000 tablets. Only 5% of those 500,000 tablets from Mesopotamia have been deciphered. And there are fewer and fewer Akkadian scholars around. I'm teaching Akkadian. We teach it at Ambridge. We have a professor that teaches Akkadian. I had 3 years of Akkadian at Hebrew Union. And one of the chief cities over in Mesopotamia is, the name of the town is Nuzu. But when we were trying to decipher the language in the time of Henry Austin Layard, 1850s, 60s, they kept saying Newsy, Newsy, Newsy. It was the genitive case, the city of Newsy. And so the real name of the city was Nuzu, but it became known in scholarship as Newsy. In that particular city, they found a palace with all kind of tablets relating to the biblical story. That is, there are parallels with Genesis, Abraham, marrying your
Joseph.
sister.
And Joseph.
Yeah, just story after story, birthrights and all kind of things that we actually find parallel stories in Genesis were right there in the city of Newsy. So they may find the sandal when they start translating more and more.
That'll be interesting if they do. So the point is that something like this is why the men are gathering in order to get together and discuss business. And here's the one from last week that Les mentioned again this morning: redeeming the land when lost due to hardship, from Leviticus 25. So they inform, or she is informing, that this is happening. And so he says, "So I'm legally informing you, acquire it before those sitting here and before the leaders of my people. If you want to exercise your right to redeem it, then do so. But if not, then tell me, so I will know. For you possess the first option to redeem it. I am next in line after you," he replied, "and he will redeem it," he being Boaz. So here's what's happening. They've got these guys that are here at this place of business at the city gates. They realize there's a formal matter that has been brought up. They've got tablets or contracts or something that is going to say that this is going to be formalized, and they've got witnesses. And that's what the 10 are there to do, is to say, we heard him say it. We heard this so-and-so say he doesn't want to redeem it. We heard Boaz say he would, and then we bless their marriage, and it's all recorded.
Yeah, it was just nice that you had all those elders at the city gate at the courthouse, so Boaz could go collect 10 of them. And this was part of the deal. You had to have witnesses. And so he goes and gets 10 witnesses and brings them back, and so they end up having a little court case.
Yeah, exactly. So Boaz says, when you require the field from Naomi, you must also require Ruth. And Les went over this. And so here's the concept, that it's not just this field. It's you've got more to it. And so I put in monkey wrench.
I figured that was monkey wrench.
That is monkey wrench. Mr. So-and-so did not see this coming. You were afraid that Boaz was going to have the monkey wrench, but no, Boaz doesn't have the monkey wrench. Mr. So-and-so has the monkey wrench, because he was ready to go buy this, and then it's like, I have to have the people attached to it as well.
Stan is really funny, but looks aren't everything.
So the Guardian says, well, now that I know about this monkey wrench, I'm unable to redeem it, for it would ruin my own inheritance. Now I take a little bit different view on the ruining his inheritance.
Okay.
I think what he may be saying is not that he couldn't care any less about the people, and that he's only hungry for land. Okay, I know that sounds like I'm being argumentative. I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just giving you a different shade of something. What I read and studied when I was working on all this for us was that what that phrase could mean is that will dilute his family. So if he brings in Ruth and Naomi, and then he has this land with them, now he's got a will and he's got a situation with family that is extended over to both properties, his and the other one. And you know how that stuff goes. You know, if somebody passes away, oftentimes the remaining family members all gather around to see what they're going to get, and things get broken into tinier pieces the more people there are that things have to be shared across. And so what several people were saying was, well, because there's more people involved, it would then impact what I would be able to leave to my family. So I don't want to add those people onto the inheritance that I'm already leaving to mine. Does that make sense? So
makes good sense.
I think that's kind of a positive way to look at it, rather than this guy is so greedy and doesn't care about people. He might actually care enough that he doesn't want to dilute the people that he already has.
Right. And apparently Boaz just thought this whole thing out. He didn't really have to bring up Ruth.
No.
But he brought up Ruth. And, and so he's playing the cards in his direction,
Yeah, well, I mean, remember what Naomi said. He won't rest until this matter is resolved.
Right.
So I think he got up from the threshing floor and was headed to town to get this figured out. And he probably had, lots of time to come up with his game plan that he was doing. So there was a problem. There was a monkey wrench, and now there's a solution. And the solution is that because that kinsman redeemer who's closer has said no and has been recorded and witnessed, now the solution is that this removes the blockade, this removes the inability for Boaz to marry Ruth, and now that's out of the way.
Right.
Okay, I thought this was good too. Les brought this up and said, now this was used, it's a parenthetical statement in your Bible. It's kind of like, hey, they're getting ready to tell you about something weird, and let us explain why it's here. This was the way that the transactions were done with the sandal and giving it to the other party. And so he says, you may acquire it, and then he removed his sandal. So, here is the official deed of the land transferred in the form of the sole of the shoe, which is just bizarre. But
I love this picture.
I know, you picked it, so I made sure it got in there.
There were several pictures of them doing this, but I just love that picture.
I had some other ones that I liked. Like I thought to myself, has this ever happened in our lifetime? And I realized that in 2008, somebody over in the Middle East in Baghdad got mad at then President Bush and took off their shoe and threw it at him. And I thought, I wonder if there was a land agreement. Maybe there was a language barrier there. Maybe he was trying to give Bush some land. I don't know, but. Seems probably not. But that's the only shoe throwing or shoe removal incident I know of in my lifetime is this one. So, but yes, he has the shoe. I think you picked this one as well. And Boaz is celebrating. So now the shoe left the gentleman who was wearing blue to Boaz wearing red and green. And he's excited that he's acquired this new odd shoe that doesn't match any of his other ones. Because now he has the land and Ruth, which he was more interested in Ruth, obviously, than the land. So he says to the leaders of the people, you are witnesses today and that I have acquired Naomi and all that belonged to Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. So there's the male family tree line that he's saying that he is acquiring. And so that would include Naomi, like we said earlier at the beginning here. And he tells them they're witnesses to that. And all the people who were at the gate and the elders replied, we are witnesses, and may the Lord make the woman who is entering your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the houses of Israel. Well, nothing like archaeology to give us a current sign from that part of the world where we have house of Rachel and house of Leah.
Right, and when you see B-E-I-T, they're doing that. I've got one map of Israel where for some reason it's spelled in one city B-E-T-H, another city B-E-I-T, it's just the same word when you see Bethlehem. It's exactly the same word, but our English transliterations there are 5 or 6 different ones of them, and so house of, so it means the house of Rachel and the house of Leah.
And, some people might say, well, there are probably street names somewhere for fictitious characters, but what we're continuing to confirm in here is that, like what you're going to talk about next week, that you found at Dan or was found at Dan, these are not just coincidences that people, out of respect of a story, decided to name streets. These are because these are people who are not only real, but they're connected to that part of the world through the generations that have lived in that part of the world. And so, just like those other instances you talked about outside with the Akkadian tablets, we're seeing outside the Bible information that parallels the information that's in the Bible. And then this one was really interesting. Here's another one of our mosaics, like we've been looking at in this class over the different characters. And this one has Ephrat and Bethlehem on it. And that was in that scripture. I stopped reading it before I got there, but if you're all of our English translations, I think, say, may you prosper in Ephrath and become famous in Bethlehem. And they leave Ephrath like that. And that's not a town name we really probably go, oh yeah, Ephrath, yeah, I know that one. But here it is, and it's right there in Greek with Bethlehem as well. So again, things preserved with those names.
Yeah, a few of us from this congregation have been there. This is at they were building a new road in Jordan, and they ran across this mosaic as they were digging it under the ground. And so in the Middle East there, Israel, Jordan, and a lot of this country, they just stopped. I remember we were driving across Galilee one year, and plain land, it was a new highway, 4 lanes, and all of a sudden the highway went around a circle and then went back, and I said, Ami, archaeological site? He said, yeah, they found an archaeological site. They couldn't build a highway or had to go around it. And that's what they do. And here they just stopped, built a church building over this place. And so when you walk into this building, you see this large mosaic. It's from the last part of the 6th century, about 590. And it's a picture of like you're standing on Mount Nebo looking toward Israel. And you can see Egypt to the south, you can see Israel in the middle, and it's a complete mosaic of that. And you can see Bethlehem at the top. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, that's B-E, it's a long E, B-E-T-H, L-E-E-M. It was the way they were spelling Bethlehem at that time. And so, anyway, it's a wonderful mosaic. But it's in Greek because at this time, the Greek language is just, the Byzantine Greek has just taken over that part of the world.
And so moving to verses 13 through 17, so Boaz marries Ruth. God opens her womb as Les went through, and they're able to conceive. And then Naomi says, may the Lord be praised because he has not left you without a guardian today. May he become famous in Israel. And then this interesting phrase at the bottom, because Les went through this really well this morning. She is better to you than 7 sons. What do you think about that?
Well, it's kind of like when Samuel's father, future father, because Samuel hadn't been born yet, and his wife was very, very upset, Hannah, because she couldn't have a baby. Mm-hmm. And he said, am I not better to you than 10 sons? So it's a similar expression like that.
Yeah.
She's better to you than 7 sons.
Yeah. I think it's a nod to, I think it's hard for us sometimes to understand because of our removal in context, but sons were the only ones they counted as any value, right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Most of the time, the daughters were just also mentions, but it was all the sons, and in the genealogies, it was the sons. But Ruth has been faithful, loyal, and if it wasn't for her and her character, then none of this would have happened. Right. And so I think it's the comparison of, if you had 7 sons and you had this long house name with your with your genealogy out there or whatever, it wouldn't be as good as what has come through Ruth.
It's a very high compliment.
Very much so. So here they are. He's still wearing his red and green so that we can understand which one is Boaz. He's in the back there. Naomi took the child and placed him on her lap. She became his caregiver. That's interesting. That's sound reminiscent of Moses just a little bit. The neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. Now he became the father of Jesse, David's father.
Yeah, let's talk about the name
Okay.
Obed.
All right.
Occurs only 4 times in Scripture. Once in Ruth, once in Chronicles, and let's show the other 2 this morning. The genealogy of Matthew, the genealogy of Luke, the 4 times. And so usually we don't, and 4 or 5 people are named Obed in the Old Testament. This is the most famous one of all. It's from a verb meaning same root that Evid comes from, the servant.
Servant.
It's from the verb to work. Same ayin, bait, dalet. It's a participle. And so it means one who serves, one who, it can even be used to worship. And everybody knows the name of somebody with that name in the Bible that you don't connect. Obadiah.
Obadiah.
Obadiah is the name Obed plus the name Yahweh.
One who serves God.
Serving Yahweh.
worships God.
Worshiping Yahweh. Mike has a question. Why don't you? Yeah, I want you to repeat the question so everybody can hear it, then I'll try to answer it.
Yeah, so the question is the marrying outside of Israel, specifically 2 Moabite women, and Orpah and Ruth, that Mahlon and Chilion took as wives. And then when they both died, the women were released and could have returned to Moab, and Naomi would have just come on back to Israel. But Ruth comes back, and now Ruth is still a Moabite, and so here's another marriage to another individual who's in Israel. Even though, as Les pointed out, he's half Canaanite. So we've got outside of Israel individuals that Yahweh had said don't do this, but then he blesses the fact that they do it.
You have general laws like God says, Moses says, through lays down some laws that are from God that kings shouldn't marry a lot of women because they'll turn hard. Well, look at Solomon. But David is not chastised for that. He still has several wives. He has 6 different sons born to 6 different. His first 6 sons were born to 6 different women. And so it was like a general principle. Solomon married 700 women and had 300 concubines. He must have had a hole in his head. But they were marriage alliances, and it got him into trouble. He started building shrines for David never did that. And so there was a general principle. And so you have, look at the line of Jesus. You have Rahab, a Canaanite. You have Ruth, a Moabite. You have Tamar, a Canaanite. And you have Bathsheba, who probably was Jewish, but she was married to a Hittite. And so you have they were general principles laid down, and those principles were debated over the centuries about, how far do we go here and there. A lot of times laws are given, and it's the general principle that you're looking at. For example, if an outsider, a Canaanite or someone like Ruth converted, which she did, then that would change the whole situation. Does that make sense? Because what was the reason for God doing that? Mostly because these people worshiped other gods.
And I would add two interesting things that hopefully when we get through the character of David over the next several weeks, and also as we're going to draw this lesson here this morning to a close on Ruth, it doesn't justify it, okay? But God didn't always approve of everything everybody did, but he still blessed people even though we fall short and we sin and we fail, right? And David's a perfect example of that, which we'll discuss over the next several weeks. And yet Jesus is who is the new covenant that's available to all, for all people from all nations to come to Yahweh. So it's interesting that these women specifically that he just mentioned that you're asking about are in the genealogy to Jesus, because Jesus is going to offer salvation to all those nations and all those people anyway. That was the whole point. The Old Testament was bring the Israelites here as my people so that I can show the rest of the world what it looks like to be in relationship with me. Eventually, for the purpose of having those people that are outside of Israel be invited back. All that takes place through Jesus, so why would there not be another nationality person who believes in Yahweh, who came out of the nations just sooner than the invitation to everyone in the genealogy? Does that make sense? So here's a sign with Obed on it. A name you just said doesn't occur that many times, and yet they still respect that over there.
Don't let the B's and the V's bother you, because Hebrew, the B is pronounced like a B when it has a dot in it, and like a V when it doesn't have a dot in it. And that doesn't make any sense at all to you. All you got to do is look at ancient Greek. When Greek came along, they couldn't do that. So Abraham's name is Avraham in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. Greek had to write it as Abraham, had to put a B in there, because that's all. Now guess what? In modern day Greek, no longer is the B a B, it's now a V. The alphabet is no longer alpha, beta, gamma, it's alpha, beta, gamma. So there are no B's in modern day Greek. I think you have to put two crazy letters together like a M and a PH to get a B sound.
We're running out of time. There was a joke there I was going to do, but I'm not going to do it. Okay, so here's the thing. On verse 17, he says, he is the father of Jesse and the father of David. And I liked how Les pointed this out. Obviously, this has to be written after David, because otherwise, how would you have this sentence? He's the father of and the grandfather of these people who have not been born yet. But really what we want to focus on is, and there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, or the root of Jesse, which a lot of people have memorized, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. That's from Isaiah 11:1. So there is starting to be some connectivity here between these people that we're seeing in the end of Ruth to the New Testament, to Jesus, and the prophecies that are in Isaiah. And so that should start to make some people happy. And here's what it looks like. This is such an easy map to understand, that you go from Abraham over here down to Judah and Tamar, which Les mentioned this morning, that that goes back to Genesis 38, which is a hard chapter to read. Most of the time, if it comes up in a preaching series, people just skip it. But it goes from those two around over to where you see Rahab and Ruth and then Bathsheba, which we're going to talk about when we get to David. And then that goes to the next column, to the next column, to the next column. And at the bottom of that column, there's Joseph and Mary and Jesus. And so we're really right on top of all the prophecies of the major and minor prophets saying, one will come in the name of the Lord, and Yahweh will dwell among us like never before. And this is what it looks like through those family lines. Now yours I like even better. Mine was not as good, because I like how you have the line of Mary underneath King David down there at the bottom. That's the genealogy that we see from Matthew, right? And then the line of Joseph from Luke at the top, going over to Mary and going over to Joseph, and then ultimately arriving at Jesus.
So, I believe Matthew's is the kingly genealogy through Solomon, and Luke's is the birth, actually the bloodline through Mary, because Solomon is the king and is the son of David in Matthew's. Nathan, the son of David, we talked about that, Nathan, last week in our class, the son of David, he was another son of Bathsheba, and the bloodline goes through him.
Named probably because of one of the things we'll talk about in the story of David, of Nathan the prophet. So the family tree condensed, a little bit easier. Not that you people need things dumbed down, but this is just a little bit easier to look at quickly. The reference to Matthew 1, also the text that Les went over and showed that it was identical from Ruth 4. And then Ruth and Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, Jesus, which just comes straight down the tree trunk, which is a little bit easier than all the different branches. But the main point is kinsman, redeemer. Boaz was not a perfect person. He sinned. He was not the Messiah. Jesus is everything Boaz was, and he didn't sin, and he's the Messiah. So clearly he's the kinsman redeemer. And interestingly, the way I look at this is, we know that after the resurrection, Jesus becomes what we will become. And he's the first fruits of the dead. He's the first of the new Adam. He's the first of the new humanity. So in a way, he is our closest kinsman redeemer, because he's already what we will be, and we're not yet. And so he is the kinsman redeemer of all. We still have mankind up there, but of all humanity, he is the kinsman redeemer, because only by him do we become restored to what we're supposed to be, renewed to what we're supposed to be. And that just leaves us with this. David HaMelech, David the King, which we will start next week, which, by the way, underneath there says somewhere, I thought it was on one of these. Maybe not. All right. Well, just go with that. David the King, we will start next week. And he is the son of Jesse, and the grandson of Obed, and the great-grandson of Boaz.
Okay.
There's the week ahead, and we're in overtime by a minute. The ending of Ruth displays the blessing of God and glory being given to God. You may feel at times like Naomi in chapter 1, bitter, barren, hurt, despairing, and hopeless. But bitterness will not have the last word for all who know Yahweh and trust in Jesus. That's an important sentence. Bitterness will not have the last word. Hopelessness and despair will not be the final refrain. No way. Jesus has died on the cross. He has risen from the dead. He has conquered death itself. All in Christ always have hope and need not to despair. There may be mourning for a time, hurt for a time, and pain for a time, but Yahweh turns mourning into dancing. He turns bitterness into blessings. So we pray this. God, thank you for everything you've taught us through the story of Ruth and Naomi over the past few weeks. Thank you for never leaving or forsaking us, even in periods of challenge and difficulty. Thank you for those things that you have blessed us with, and all those that you will bless us with. Help us see and identify how you are weaving and redeeming our stories together. We pray in Jesus' name. Have a blessed week. Come back next week for King David.